Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the Northern Dispatch. You know, this week we have been told by our leaders in this country that the economy is doing great. Everything is going well. We should be proud of the fact that Canada is now the first country in the G7 to drop rates for, I believe, the third time in a row. My numbers may be off there, but one thing we do know for sure is that the numbers are off for the federal government. We've got some housekeeping here to take care of before we get into the show, and that, of course, involves us reading last episode's comments. We told you that we'd read the best comments, so we hope you get involved and engaged on this episode as well. But the first comment we have comes from Gail Horichuk, 1269. I hope I got that right. He writes, "They were making fun of Trudeau, not Canada." And I believe that is in response to Donald Trump's trolling. I think that, of course, is right. I think many in the United States do want to make fun of Trudeau. They want to dig the knife in on Justin Trudeau. And I hope they have some love for us Canadians and are not just going after the country as a whole. What other comments do we have?
So we have Stacy RI5PB saying, "Trump's not bluffing. He knows what's going on up here and wants it cleaned up. Thank goodness." That's definitely one way to look at it, for sure.
And lastly, we have Gordon Meir, 4359. In my opinion, if a 25% tariff is a price to pay to get rid of Trudeau, then it's worth it. Well, I know I understand the sentiment, but you may change your opinion when it actually comes into play.
Yeah, it sounds good right now when it's not a reality. Let's take a look at the last episode's poll. The question for the last episode was, do you think Trump will follow through with his tariff threat, or is he bluffing? 78.9% of respondents say that Trump will follow through. That's going to hurt Canada for sure.
Yeah, I think, and I think he will follow through. He's demonstrated to make some pretty provocative claims before and follow through with those claims. So I think he's demonstrated that he is willing to follow through on some of these promises, no matter how quote unquote reckless they may seem to people.
Well, the poll question for this episode, it's a simple one. I anticipate the results to be pretty skewed here. The question is Justin Trudeau and maybe the Trudeau government intentionally manipulating the economy for political points? All right, let us know your answer to that poll question. But on this episode of the Northern Dispatch, we are introducing a fourth seat. We're introducing here for you the National Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano. Franco, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to throw it right to you now for your reaction to Tiff Macklem, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, his announcement that Canada is once again cutting rates. What was your immediate reaction?
Well, right away, I know that a lot of Canadians are going to feel a little bit of relief, right? Like, especially if you have a variable rate mortgage, or you're a consumer and you have a lot of debt, or you're a business and you have a lot of debt and you're looking to take on more debt. But hold on a second, folks. Let's look back just one step and try to figure out why interest rates spiked in the first place. And the reason interest rates spiked in the first place is because of all of the money printing that the government central bank did during the pandemic. The Bank of Canada printing up, more than $300 billion out of thin air and dropping it into an economy that was going through revolving lockdowns. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. That's the inflation tax. And that is always what creates general inflation, right? So you have the government hiking taxes, running massive deficits into the tens of billions of dollars. Then you have the central bank, the Bank of Canada, financing the government's out-of-control spending. That is what led to a 40-year high inflation, and that's what pushed up the rates in the first part. So, I don't want to discount the fact that a lot of people are really nervous about the high interest rates they're paying, but we have to remember what caused the pain in the first part. And the first thing that caused the pain was the out-of-control spending from the Trudeau government, the Trudeau government's tax hikes, and the Bank of Canada printing money out of thin air.
But Franco, if you were to believe Justin Trudeau, they didn't cause the inflation, but they've solved it. So, they had no way to stop the inflation from actually skyrocketing to 40-year highs, but they are solely responsible for bringing it down.
Well, I don't believe Justin Trudeau. I don't, right? And neither should you or anyone watching this awesome show. And the reason is, number one, general price inflation is always because of an expansion of the money supply, printing money, right? That is what causes general price inflation. Now, prices rise and fall all the time. That's relative prices. There's only one thing that pushes up all prices throughout an economy, and that's an expansion of the artificial money supply, which we saw during COVID-19, the pandemic, and the Bank of Canada, right? And the federal government running these massive, massive deficits. The next thing I'm going to say, if you're not living under a rock and you're not in government and you're not a politician, you know that the cost of living is still going up, right? You hear these inflation statistics being thrown around in the mainstream media. Well, what that shows is that prices are still going up. They're just not going up as fast as they were when inflation was a 40-year high. So yes, the government is at least a huge driver of inflation. And no, the government has not solved the cost of living crisis facing many Canadians.
Tanya, let me bring you in here. The reaction to this announcement, the reaction to this rate cut announcement, from what I can see, has been resoundingly negative.
Yeah, so I think if you're an individual looking at this and saying, oh, interest rates are going down, that's good for me. That means my mortgage goes down, maybe my credit card payments go down. As an individual, that's a good thing. But as an economy, usually when you see interest rates going down this quickly and for this many consecutive terms, it's not a good thing. Now, I'm not an economist, but I know there's one on the panel. So I bet you can tell me, Franco, why it's really bad for our economy for this to be going down so fast.
Well, I mean, like, it's funny that you have government control of a price, and that's what an interest rate essentially is, right? The price, it's essentially a time preference, right? The price of borrowing now versus or saving versus consuming now. But, like, it's actually quite simple. You'll hear a lot of jargon, right, from these talking heads on the media and whatever. But to understand how an economy grows, it's actually quite simple. You have to produce before you consume. You have to produce more than you consume. If you consume more than you produce, that's bad, right? And the way that you produce more is by saving, investing, and having entrepreneurs take risk with those savings and investment to grow the economy further, right? That's how you grow an economy. The wrong way, or the fake way to grow the economy, is to have relatively low interest rates forced down by easy money and easy credit and massive government spending and government borrowing, right? So there's the real true way to grow an economy, and then there's the bad fake way to grow the economy.
The other problem with bringing down interest rates this quickly is people are going to think, hey, you know what? Maybe now is a great time to buy a house. So
they'll borrow more.
Yeah. So one of the fears is this going to spur another housing frenzy? Which, to your earlier point, Franco, by printing money, you increase inflation. Well, as many people may or may not know, when you have a whole bunch of people taking out mortgages, that is introducing brand new printed money into the economy, which will drive inflation.
A big concern that we're seeing right now is also this worry that the Canadian loonie, the Canadian dollar, continues to plummet in relation to the US dollar. I believe it's at a 3-year low. Now close to, I think it's 69 cents at the time of this recording. This seems to be, well, is this entirely Justin Trudeau's fault? What's your read on this, Franco?
Well, that's tough, right? There's so many different things that go into currency prices and relative exchanges. But, you know, I want to talk just specifically about the poll that you mentioned on tariffs earlier, right? Now, you always have to if you're a serious government, you always have to pay attention to what other countries are doing, especially our largest trading partner and ally, the United States. But if you're also a serious government, the way to, let's say, combat things that other countries are doing that might impact you is to focus on your own economy. You really want to give it to the rest of the world? Then make Canada the most competitive place to invest, to do business, and to grow our workforce. That should be the focus of any serious government. Remember, tariffs at the end of the day, folks, and I'm glad Harrison and Ryan and Tanya, I'm speaking to your audience on this. Tariffs at the end of the day are another distortionary tax on Canadians, right? Tariffs are not good. We shouldn't be giving the government more of our money. And that's exactly what a tariff does. If you really want to be the most competitive country, don't give the government more power to tax you. We need to get the government out of the way so more entrepreneurs can make more stuff that money buys, grow the economy, bring inflation down, and make sure we have more job opportunities that pay higher.
Canadians across the country know that the economy is in a bad way because they feel it at the grocery store. They feel it during their Christmas shopping. We all know it's bad, and it's been bad for many years. But at the same time, we've had politicians gaslighting Canadians, telling everyone that things are so great, that maybe it's even sunny ways, one might describe it as, that the economy is doing great, and compared to our G7 partners, you know, Canada's really strong right now. The reality is, Canada on a per capita GDP level is below that of Alabama. Take a look at this montage of Canadian leaders gaslighting us into telling us that our economy is somehow performing so well.
We're drawing in global investment to a higher rate than just about any other country per capita in the G20. We are delivering things that make a real difference in Canadians' lives.
I take a little bit of issue with what you said about what the economy needs. What the economy needs is for people to be able to afford their groceries. We're focused on Canadians. I'll let the bankers worry about the economy. There's a lot to feel optimistic about it, particularly when we look at the overall situation of our economy, which is predicted to grow faster than most of our peers, including faster than the United States next year. It's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive. I got to be able to pay the rent this month. I got to be able to buy groceries for my kids, to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. And that's something that's instinctive. When the storm comes, you want to hunker down and just sort of huddle up and wait for it to blow over. We can't do that around climate change. Canadians are justifiably proud of our immigration system. It has made our economy the envy of the world. It's how we've built strong, diverse communities. It's how we've demonstrated that differences can and must be a source of strength.
Because we have been so fiscally responsible over the past years, we have room to respond if there is no more to do. We have the lowest deficit in the G7, the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7. The international bond rating agencies have confirmed Canada's AAA rating.
I'd just like to say a couple of words about the Canadian economy. We've had some positive news over the past few months. We have now had inflation down within the Bank of Canada's target range for 7 months in a row. And in July, inflation hit a 40-month low. That is 4 months in a row that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. That is really good news.
But of course, an economy isn't about numbers. An economy is also about people.
Tanya, what is going through the minds of these Canadian leaders? Why do they even bother when everyone knows they're not telling the truth?
I think it's all smoke and mirrors, right? If as a politician you say to everybody, look how badly we've screwed up, look at how we've just destroyed the economy, please vote for me in the next election, it's not going to work. If you lie and say, look at what a fantastic job we've done, don't you want to vote for me in the next election? Maybe you've got a chance.
Well, and the problem is that the opportunity to actually tell everybody that things aren't going so well was a long time ago. That was the opportunity for them to say, you know what, we've seen some of our policy decisions. They're not going the way that we thought. We take responsibility for that. We're going to course correct. But no, they've decided to just double down and triple down. And the problem is, Harrison, I'm seeing on social media, I was on a Facebook feed earlier today, and I'm seeing the Liberal talking points. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We have this and we have that. I'm like, clearly these are people that are only watching CBC and are only watching these clips. And unfortunately, that's what they're believing.
Or they're bots.
Right. And let's just look at per capita GDP, right? The buying or the purchasing power of the average Canadian and Canadians, the indicator as to whether or not Canadians are getting richer or poorer. And for 6 consecutive quarters, that number has been decreasing. I believe it's now 8 out of the last 9 quarters per capita GDP has been decreasing. People throw this word, the recession word, around. And I want to ask you, Franco, is Canada in a recession, whether it technically follows the definition of a GDP?
Well, speaking of GDP, right, it's a bit of a funny little statistic that the government loves to use. And what's included within GDP? Well, one of the metrics that influences that statistic is government. The bigger the government is, the bigger the GDP statistic can be, because it's a direct factor in GDP outcomes, right? So the government can juice the GDP statistics, so to speak, by increasing the size of government. Now, I want a proof point of that. Let's just look to the latest jobs report from Statistics Canada, right? Well, if you go back to before the pandemic, February 2020, the number of government employees across Canada has gone up by 18% since pre-pandemic. The number of workers outside government has gone up 5%. Government jobs, 18%. Jobs outside of government, 5%. So, you know, when you talk about the health of the economy, it's better to actually split up the two different sectors, the government sector and the private sector. The makers versus the takers. Well, if you're in government, you're doing just fine, right? We mentioned the number of jobs increased across Canada, but let's just look at the federal government. In less than a decade, Trudeau has added 108,000 extra federal government bureaucrats. Not only that, there's been more than 1 million pay raises handed out in the last 4 years as people and businesses in the private sector struggled. There's been more than $1 billion in taxpayer-funded bonuses since 2015. And the bigger bureaucracy collecting bigger paychecks and bigger bonuses means that the cost of the federal bureaucracy has gone up 73% under Trudeau. So when you want to talk about the economy, you have to talk about the tale of two economies, where the private sector has been taking it on the chin, small businesses, individuals paying higher taxes, government regulations, making it harder to build anything in Canada. Then within the golden gates of government, you have more bureaucrats taking bigger pay and all the other types of perks.
Is it possible that this rate cut will trigger more housing starts?
Yeah, I mean, it is possible, right? I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen there, but you bring up the housing affordability issue, right? Like, remember, the government also spent hundreds of thousands of dollars funding and promoting a report that recommended a form of a home equity tax. Well, here's the thing. You're not going to build new homes with taxes. You build new homes with hammers and nails. So you got to cut the regulations to allow entrepreneurs to actually build more homes. Now, speaking of Canada's government housing agency, I saw a report today at a Blacklocks, the online news site, talking about one of the CMHC brass saying, you know, like, we're not going to tell you about our bonuses. That's personal information, yada, yada, yada. But to really put a cherry on top of this, folks, like, think of this, okay? Over the last 4 years, since the beginning of 2020, we have been in a housing affordability crisis. The housing agency of the government that's supposed to be dealing with this housing crisis has failed, and they still handed out $102 million in bonuses.
Let's get into this, Ryan. You know, Canada right now has the lowest housing availability in the G7. At the same time that this government likes to tell us that in the G7, Canada's economy is actually doing well. We're cutting our rates at a faster rate than any other G7 country. Does that really matter if Canadians can't afford to buy a house, if Canadians at the highest rate are going to food banks to put food on their table?
No, and this is why when they trot out these statistics and they try and tell Canadians that everything is great, unless you are a senior that has no mortgage, where you have a savings and you're still getting CPP on top of that and you're not feeling this, nobody believes them. And people are frankly getting more and more insulted when, you know, you have people that are fighting to actually stay in a house rather than, you know, have to consider going to Canadian Tire and picking up a tent and living, you know, next to their 3 other friends that are living in cars and living in tents now. Yet you're being told by Chrystia Freeland, we're not in a recession, we're in a vibe session. It's just in your head that you don't have enough money. It's just in your head that you have to skip meals every other day in order to actually pay rent. It's just in your head that your parents have had to come and live with you and your kids have had to come and live with you because they can't afford anywhere to live. So it's just downright insulting to the vast majority of Canadians. And this is why you've seen, despite all of this bravado of this GST holiday and the rest of this, the poll numbers for the Liberals haven't budged.
Tanya, we've got vibe session. We previously had a she session during the 2021 election campaign. We've got people who, the Prime Minister says he doesn't think about monetary policy. Chrystia Freeland telling Canadians to cut their Disney Plus. Where is the seriousness with these people? Do they not understand that Canadians are really suffering at a rate that they probably haven't in many, many years?
It's either that they don't understand, or again, it's the smoke and mirrors that they know full well what's happening and they're just trying to hide it from the Canadian public because they want to get reelected. I mean, all these Liberals have to do is come out of their ivory towers and start talking to everyday Canadians. 25% of Canadians are living in poverty, and that includes children. And at the same time, 25% of Canadians are having to use the food bank. And then you have the statistic that over 300 foreclosures are happening every day in this country. Canadians can't afford their homes. Canadians can't afford food. Canadians can't afford gas in the car to go to work. Canadians are living on credit. We have, I think the stat is that we have the most consumer debt in terms of households in the G7. Canadians are overspent, and the Liberals are pretending like none of this is happening, that we're not suffering.
It feels as though that for every stat the government rolls out, there's 3 or 4 that are absolutely catastrophic to prove the opposite point. Franco, are we leading towards, you think, an early election? Is the government trying to do this to become more popular and to try to trigger some GDP growth in the lead up to a potential election? Is that what people are talking about?
I don't know. That's a great question, but I'm here in Ottawa. I talk to people every day in political circles, and you ask 10 different people, you get 11 different answers on when they think the next election is going to be, right? But look, we're talking about do they just not understand? Number one, they don't understand because they live in a completely different world, right? They live in a taxpayer-funded party. That's what they have going on. Remember, folks, every single year, while you struggle, while you pay higher taxes, where you can barely afford to pay your rent, your politician gives themselves a pay raise every single year, right? The minister's pay raise or the minister's salary, like Freeland or Guilbeault or whomever, is just shy of $300,000 every year. The Prime Minister's salary is $406,000. They have taken 5 pay raises since the beginning of 2020. Pandemic, inflation crisis, housing crisis. None of that stopped these politicians, all of them, by the way, from taking a pay raise every single year. They have become financially divorced from the people they're supposed to represent, right? It's called the House of Commons for a reason. But they are living in a different life from us. Not only do they have these huge salaries, they get this huge pension when they retire. If they don't get a pension, they get a 6-figure severance. They get a transition allowance. They get a ton of their expenses paid for. So they are living on a taxpayer gravy train. They have no idea how hard it is for the average Canadian out there.
Ryan, is it really possible that they don't understand? Because the polling is so obvious. Everywhere they look, even their internal polls are telling the Liberals that they are in deep trouble. So they know it's not working. Is it possible that they don't care?
I think it's a little bit of a nuance, because I think what's going on, we've seen that the Liberals, they use these theatrical answers in question period, these non-answers when they're challenged by reporters. They know what's going on. I think the issue is they are in a survival situation when it comes to their government. They're in a survival situation when it comes to their post-political careers, because you remember, a lot of these Liberals are going to be losing their seats, and that's going to have to transition them kind of to Franco's point, from the ivory tower back down to the streets with the rest of us. So they have to be thinking about, what am I going to be doing after that? Is there going to be any business that is going to be interested in putting Chrystia Freeland in a senior position that is going to have her in charge of their budget? Probably not after this. So I think they do know kind of what's going on. You see it every day where they say, "Oh, I've talked to my constituents and they love everything that we're doing," only to be refuted by either a reporter or another politician saying, "I actually talked to those same people and they said this is a disaster." So they've been caught out on so many scandals. It's obvious that they knowingly act unethically. They knowingly try and cover some of this up unethically, and at this point, they have lost the control of the House. So the only thing that they can try to control right now is the narrative. So I think they know better, and it's more devious than that. It's not that they don't care, is that they care more about their political and personal fortunes than they do about the average Canadian.
Tanya, I want to bring it back to Tiff Macklem's announcement on Wednesday. He said, very notably, that the available jobs did not come close to the amount of supply in the labor market. Boy, that labor shortage sure went away fast, didn't it?
It did, and I think we've been seeing this for several months, because I remember looking at StatsCan back in the summer regarding this, saying, why are we getting 90,000 new jobs, but our unemployment rate stays the exact same? It's because we are welcoming more new Canadians than we have jobs for. We're not creating all these new jobs to support the number of people that we have seeking those jobs.
Well, and as we saw, unemployment rose again to 6.8%. So, it comes back to Freeland and the Liberals talking up, oh, we're making all these jobs. It's great. Well, you keep bringing in more people to this country than we have jobs for. So what do you think's going to happen? You're going to have more unemployed people, and then that has the direct effect on the per capita GDP continuing to go down.
Franco, do you think that the federal government, looking back on this really a mass immigration experiment that we've gone through, which now appears to be correcting itself, the government now appears to be correcting, was that designed to artificially raise the GDP and convince Canadians that things are going great by just bringing in millions of people?
I'm not sure what the intentions were behind that, if I could just be perfectly honest, right? I'm not sure if it was for the reason that you suggest. Perhaps they just thought that they were doing the right thing. Like, I honestly don't know. But look, at the end of the day, and I want to bring it back to a point I made earlier, if you want to have real economic success, you have to build things and produce value. That is the only way. You can't create economics true success by printing money out of thin air. You can't bring about real success and real better living standards by spending money from the government that we don't have. You can't do that. The only way to build a true resilient economy that brings success to all Canadians is to build stuff and provide value. And the only way we're going to be able to get our economy firing on all cylinders in that way is to cut back the size of government. Businesses, Canadians, are overregulated. The government is way too big. We have to shrink regulations, cut red tape, and drastically cut the size and scope of not just the federal government, but all governments across Canada.
Yeah, I was going to kind of lead into that and open it up to the panel and ask, what worked for this country in the past? There was a time before Justin Trudeau that we had a world-leading economy, that people thought the Canadian economy and the Canadian financial system was really a North Star to follow. What worked for us in the past, and what is it that we're going to have to do to get this country back to that position? I'll open that up to anyone.
Well, I think you can go back as early as Stephen Harper, and we had one of the most vibrant and bustling middle classes during his government towards the end. And this is following, recall, the 2008 crash that hit the world. And it didn't hit Canada as hard. It obviously hit the United States the most. But through having someone who understands finance at the head of the country, I think it allowed us to recover. Now, did he do the best job he possibly could have? No, of course not. Every government makes mistakes. But he was able to get us back to a point where, we were doing okay. Housing prices didn't just skyrocket under Stephen Harper. They were on a steady trajectory, and he was able to have the economy recover in a gradual manner. And this is the issue with the interest rates coming down as fast as they are. They should be coming down gradually. They shouldn't be falling like a stone.
Tanya, let me ask you this, because we look at the data, we see that the United States also has a cost of living issue. The price of goods in the United States has increased. But compared to Europe and Canada, the United States has been doing far better. Both Canada and Europe have fallen off in comparison to the United States. And we hear a lot about, Joe Biden being, bad for the U.S. economy, but compared to Justin Trudeau, I mean, the U.S. is just far ahead of us, it appears, on almost all of these other metrics.
Well, Justin Trudeau managed to double our deficit in, the 9 years that he's been in office? When COVID hit, initially they said, okay, everybody who's qualified will receive $2,000 per month for 2 months, and then that's it. But they just kept the CERB checks rolling. And I know a lot of people did lose their jobs during that, but now we're finding out that many people who were working and did not qualify received CERB. That's a lot of money that went to individuals that really didn't deserve it. And where did that money come from? It was just created out of thin air.
Well, and you also have the CEBA loans as well. The recent bombshell report that came out, I think it was over $3 billion went out to, 77,000 businesses that did not qualify for it as well. So when you have all of that happen, and then when you're talking about our housing market, I think we were in lockdown far more than the United States. And what did that do? That drove people to look at buying houses away from urban areas so they didn't feel like that they were being cooped up in a concrete jungle and feeling like they were in a prison. So you can just go on and on and on. And there are so many aggregating factors to this. And you had a lot of other European countries as well kind of do the same thing. But you had a lot of the states in the United States not really apply too much to the lockdown approach. Some of the more liberal states, were in longer than others. But as a country, they didn't all follow kind of the same strategy. So they came out of lockdown way earlier than everybody else, and I think it had a drastic impact on that.
Franco, I want to, we like to try to end the show on a positive note, but we're not going to be able to do that on this subject.
No, I gotcha.
But I got to ask you, how bad is this going to get for Canada? What is the 6-7 month outlook for us right now?
Well, I mean, the answer is it depends, right? I mean, if the government keeps doing what it's doing, it's going to keep not being very good for anyone not in the government. I mean, to Tanya's point, the government has doubled the debt in less than a decade. Like, interest charges on the debt federally cost taxpayers more than $1 billion every week. Every time you pay the federal sales tax, every dollar you pay in the federal sales tax goes to pay interest on the debt. The federal government is spending more money on interest charges than it sends to the provinces in healthcare transfers. Now, what's so worrying is that there will be an election in 2025, presumably, and you have a government that is behind in the polls by about 20 points. So what are they going to do? Well, I'm worried they're going to try to keep buying votes with people's kids and grandkids' money, racking up more and more debt. They got to find a dance partner in the House, be it the Bloc or the NDP. Are they going to try to do a deal with them to raise taxes or increase even more wasteful spending to get their support? Now, Harrison, on the bright side, let me end on a good note. Canada should and can be the most prosperous country in the world, for sure. We have brilliant people here. We're a very well-educated workforce. We have abundant natural resources, diverse natural resources, right? We are right beside the world's largest economy. There is no reason that Canada cannot be the freest, most prosperous country in the world. We just need to cut back the size and scope and cost of the government.
Well, you managed to pull us back from the darkness and end on a positive note, Franco. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you joining us on the Northern Dispatch. Reminder, the poll question for this episode is this, and it's linked in the top comment of this video. Is the Trudeau government intentionally manipulating the economy for political points? Engage with us. Let me hear what you guys have to say. We'll read out the best comments, so do try to get involved. We appreciate you joining us. We'll speak to you all next week.